Long before the Marvel Cinematic Universe became a multi-million-dollar assembly line of quips and colourful spandex, there was a very different kind of superhero vibe brewing at the turn of the millennium. If you were a teenager in 1998, cool had a very specific uniform: floor-length black leather trench coats, wrap-around sunglasses worn exclusively indoors, and a soundtrack that sounded like a heavy metal band fighting a drum machine in a basement rave. Blade wasn't just a movie. It was an aesthetic catalyst for an entire era of edge that would eventually give us everything from The Matrix to Underworld. The funny thing about the Daywalker is that he occupied a space in pop culture that felt untouchable. He was the predator who hunted the predators, a stoic force of nature who made silver stakes and UV grenades feel like essential fashion accessories. But translating that specific brand of cinematic cool to an aging grey box of the PlayStation 1 in the year 2000 was a tall order. We're talking about a system that was already hearing the footsteps of the PlayStation 2 behind it, trying to render high-speed swordplay and gothic industrial cityscapes using hardware that was essentially held together by duct tape and dreams. I remember looking at the back of the box at the time, seeing Wesley Snipes' scowl and wondering if the 32-bit processor could actually handle the weight of that much attitude. It's time to see if the digital version of Eric Brooks can still draw blood, or if the Daywalker is just walking into an outdated game design. Welcome to the PSX Index. I'm Parascreen, and this is the show where I play and document all 1,278 PS1 games released across Northern America, and this episode is Index Entry 214. We are pivoting hard today. We've just spent the last two entries cowering in the shadows of the Barrows mansion and wrestling the psychological fractures of Clock Tower, where our only defence was a panic button and a prayer. But with Blade, we are officially trading the role of the victim for the role of the ultimate hunter. It's a jarring shift in the index's momentum, moving from the slow, deliberate friction of the point-and-click horror game to a hyper-stylised third-person action title that wants you to feel like a god in a tactical vest. The project is all about unpredictable range. One week we're analysing the physics of a kart racer, the next we're hiding under beds, and today we're testing the licensed game curse to see if Activision managed to bottle lightning or just a bit of stagnant swamp water. Blade arrives late in the console's life cycle, which usually means one of two things. Either the developers have mastered the hardware to pull off a technical miracle, or it's a final, hurried rush in before the lights go out on the 32-bit era. We're going to dissect the combat, the atmosphere, and the sheer jank factor to see where the stake lands. Sharpen the sword and check your blood bags, we have a city to clean up. By the time the year 2000 rolled around, the licensed game had a reputation that was, to put it mildly, less than stellar. We were living in an era where the movie tie-ins were often treated like digital merchandise, cheaply made, rushed to a market that hit a theatrical window and usually about as deep as a puddle. The strategy for most developers was to slap a familiar face on a generic platformer and hope the branding did the heavy lifting, but Blade feels like it was trying to fight against that tide. Activision didn't just want a crash clone in a trench coat. They were clearly aiming for something that captured the visceral R-rated grit of the source material. There is a dry humour in looking back at these ambitious late-gen titles. You can see where the developers were looking at the cinematic choreography of the movie and sweating, trying to figure out how to translate Wesley Snipes' martial art prowess into a controller with 4 face buttons and some shoulder triggers. For a project like the Index, these games aren't the most interesting to document because they represent a struggle. It's not just the cash in, It's an attempt to push the PlayStation 1 to behave like a much younger, more powerful machine than it actually was. It's a game built on the cool factor of 1998, released during the transition of 2000, and trying to survive on the hardware of 1994.
I read the book. Still don't believe the hype though.
Imagine, Blade, a world of eternal night. No more skulking in the shadows. No need to hide anymore. It will be our world, and ours alone. No more idiot humans to deal with. They can take their place in the cattle trucks, in their natural place at last. And as for you, well, there's no place for a daywalker in a sunless world, is there? You will be obsolete, an unpleasant memory.
So much for business then.
There's only one business to be in, Blade. Power. And we've just closed the deal. Show him. Do you understand now? You only got this far because we let you.
You are so full of shit.
Kill him now!
When you actually sit down and play Blade, the first thing that hits you is the sheer ambition of the character model. For a PlayStation 1 game, Blade himself looks remarkably detailed, the weapons are visible, and he carries that signature stoic posture. This is Naughty Dog level technical squeezing, but applied to a dark urban brawler. However, the cost of that detail is immediately apparent in the environment. To keep the frame rate from chugging into a slideshow, the levels are often shrouded in that classic PlayStation fog or set in a cramped, dimly lit corridor that feels like they were designed specifically to hide the hardware screaming protests. The human reflection here is realising that the biggest villain in the game isn't Deacon Frost, it's the camera. In an era before the dual analog stick setup became a universal standard for the third-person action, Blade was wrestling with how to show you a fight while you're actually in it. You'll be mid-combo, feeling like a total badass, only for the camera to get stuck behind a gothic pillar or a dumpster, leaving you to fight a group of vampires based entirely on the sound of their gruts and the spark of your sword hitting the armour. It's a fascinating look at a game design in a state of flux, a bridge between the fixed camera dread of Clock Tower and the free roaming action we'd seen perfected in the next generation. When the game actually lets you loose, the combat system reveals a surprising amount of depth for a licensed brawler from 2000. You aren't just mashing a single attack button, there's a deliberate crunch in the way Blade moves between his arsenal. Switching from silver stakes to the UV pump shotgun or the signature titanium sword feels weighty and impactful. There is a genuine human satisfaction in nailing a combo that ends with a vampire disintegrating into a cloud of ash. It's one of the few games of the era that actually makes you feel like the Daywalker rather than a guy in a costume with a health bar. However, that weight comes with a significant side of friction. The game uses a tank control adjustment movement scheme that makes tight combat encounters feel like you're trying to parallel park a semi-truck in a nightclub. You have to be incredibly intentional with your positioning, which while frustrating at times, adds to that predator mindset. You aren't a frantic button masher, you are a disciplined hunter who has to time every swing and every reload. It's a combat loop that demands respect, and while it might feel stiff by modern standards, it captures that stoic, calculated violence that made the movie a cult classic. If you want to know exactly what the late 90s sounded and looked like, you don't need a history book. You just need to play Blade for 15 minutes. The game is a total immersion into the gothic industrial aesthetic that defined the era. We're talking about the grimy subway stations, rain-slick city streets, and underground rave dens that feel like they're being held together by rust and bass. The colour palette is almost exclusively various shades of damp concrete and neon blue, creating a vibe that is remarkably consistent even when the hardware is struggling to keep up. The soundtrack is the real hero here though. It's a relentless barrage of techno and breakbeats that perfectly mirrors the high-energy choreography of the film's opening Bloodbrave. Even when the gameplay gets a bit repetitive or the level design starts feeling like a series of identical grey boxes, the music keeps the momentum forward. It's a reminder of a time when games were unapologetically trying to be cool in a very specific, aggressive way. For the first time in 2026, it feels like a digital time capsule. A window into a world where anything was edgy, everyone was wearing leather, and the future looked like a dimly lit warehouse with a great sound system. There is a hilarious, almost endearing stiffness to the way Blade moves when the action isn't clicking. While the character model is a late-gen triumph, the animations for jumping and interacting with the environment are pure 32-bit comedy. Watching the Daywalker, the world's most fierce vampire hunter, struggle to hop over a waist-high crate with all the grace of a wooden puppet is a reminder of the era's technical friction. It's that dry humour we often find in the Index, the contrast between the cinematic cool the game is aiming for, and the reality of a character model getting snagged on a grey polygon. The voice acting and dialogue also leans heavily into that B-movie charm. Every line is delivered with a gravelly intensity that feels like it was recorded in a single take in a very small room, which honestly adds to the aesthetic. It's a game that takes itself incredibly seriously, which only makes the technical hiccups, like a vampire clipping through a wall, or a death animation that feels like a physics engine having a midlife crisis, even more entertaining. This isn't bad design necessarily, it's just the natural result of 2000-era ambition hitting the ceiling of the hardware's capabilities. Looking back at Blade from 2026, it's easy to see it as a fascinating evolutionary link in the superhero genre. It was released right as the industry was beginning to figure out that combat could be rhythmic and stylistic rather than just a button mash and chore. While it doesn't have the fluidity of something like the Arkham series or the modern Spider-Man games, you can see the DNA of those future hits buried in the silver stakes and the sword combos of this title. It was a brave attempt to move past the generic platformer license mold and create something that actually respected the protagonist's skill set. As we document this for the Index, the legacy of Blade is one of survival. It survived the transition between console generations, it survived the licensed game curse, and it even managed to survive the hardware limitations that tried to turn its cinematic action into a slideshow. It's a messy, gritty, and often frustrating game, but it's one with a soul. It's a reminder that even when the PlayStation 1 was on its last legs, developers were still finding ways to make us feel like a predator in a world of monsters, even if we occasionally got stuck in the furniture while doing it.
Ah, Blade. What a pleasant surprise. After playing such an important role in our little enterprise, I'm glad you've decided to stick around for the finale.
It ain't gonna work.
And why is that? You shouldn't believe everything you hear, Blade.
Walking away from the rainy, neon-drenched streets of Blade feels like finally taking off a pair of sunglasses after a 2-hour rave. Your eyes need a second to adjust to the lack of leather and techno. This was a game that refused to go quietly into the night, pushing the PlayStation to its absolute limits just to prove that the Daywalker could exist in the 32-bit world. It's clunky, it's edgy, and it's a perfect snapshot of that specific Y2K transition where the industry was shedding its skin and becoming something more cinematic. 214 games down, 1064 to go. Trying to navigate this project is a lot like hunting vampires. If you don't have the right tools and a solid crew behind you, the shadows will eventually swallow you whole. The PSX Index isn't a trip down memory lane, it's a documentation of a massive 1278 game legacy, but the algorithm is a bit of a bloodsucker itself. It prefers channels that stay in one lane, and a project that stumps from gothic horror to vampire hunter and then into a surreal claymation can easily get lost in the dark. Right now, only 2% of you watching are actually subscribed. That means 90% of you are essentially fighting the night without silver bullets. If you want to ensure we reach that final index entry, hit the subscribe button, leave a like and drop a comment to keep the pulse high in the rankings. You can also explore the curated playlists on your screen to see the full chaotic history we've already documented. Next time on the PSX Index, we are leaving the grit of the city behind for something far more pliable. We're moving from the sharp edges of a titanium sword to the squishy, handcrafted world of one of the most visually unique platformers ever made. We're going to find out if a hero made of clay can survive a world of literal monkeys and bizarre, offbeat humour. Get ready for index entry 215, Skull Monkeys. The sun is coming up and the hunt is over. I'll see you in the next entry.